I wouldn't charge any fees to set up the investments. I would just charge for the evoke process, because I wanted to show a client that, or kind of infer to a client, I value this so much. This is the thing that I'm going to charge for. I'm not going to charge you for the setting up of the investments, because that is, frankly, it's so easy for me to kind of know what to do for everyone's slightly different, but I'm just like, I know how to do that stuff. That's not where the value is.
Welcome to another episode of Talk FS, the podcast for professionals in or entering the financial services industry. Today I'm joined by Adrian Kidd, an advisor who's transitioned from a corporate background into a more coaching-led approach within financial services. Adrian is particularly passionate about emotional advice and truly understanding people, not just their finances. His journey highlights how powerful emotional intelligence can build stronger client relationships and deliver better outcomes. In today's conversation, we'll be exploring transitioning into financial services with a fresh, people-first mindset and the power of emotional intelligence and coaching within modern finance. Adrian, thank you for joining me and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Fantastic. So I mentioned there in my intro that you had a background in corporate before moving into sort of more of the coaching-led financial advice world. Talk to me about that sort of transition, and also I'll be interested to know, following that, how that shaped your philosophy on working with clients as well, if that's okay.
Sure. So I was very fortunate to land a really good job, my first ever job for Credit Suisse First Boston, as they were then, and then became Credit Suisse, and just worked my way up through the ranks from essentially just doing P&L reports for a trading desk and then managing a couple of £100 million worth of sterling Eurobonds that I used to trade for them. And it was great. And it really opened my eyes to just like how that kind of world really operates. It obviously, being in investment markets, I really learned a hell of a lot about how those kind of things work, which was kind of helpful in terms of where I was going in my career, even though I didn't really know where I was going. I got a little bit disillusioned with the corporate world. And hence, a friend of mine who was working for Abbey National, as it was back then, Santander, said, why don't you come and work as a financial advisor for us? Because you like people, you know your way around markets, rather than, I was planning on taking like a year or two off, just going to go travel the world. Anyway, so I went through their training program and just, really, really liked the sort of having gone from an impersonal kind of approach where it was like, we're dealing with pension funds, central banks of different countries. This was like obviously sitting in front of an individual, and it just felt way more impactful in terms of what you could say to somebody and how hopefully they would take on your kind of best ideas and shape their financial lives.
Yeah, it must have been interesting because, like you said, when you're working at that scale, you're conscious of the impact of the end user, the end client, but you never have to sit them in front of them, see the whites of their eyes and see what you're saying is going to impact how they can plan their retirement, or what legacy they would leave to their next generations. That must have been quite an eye-opening transition for you.
Yeah, I mean, on sometimes these kind of trades that we were doing with like the pension funds or the central bank of Sweden or Norway, whatever, they were like 25 to 50 million pounds, which is probably very small fry in today's terms. But at the time, quite sizable chunks of money. But you're right, you never actually got to, there was a salesperson, almost like an intermediary between me making the price and actually them kind of speaking to that side. So it was very impersonal, whereas this is just the fact that you're not dealing with those kind of numbers like the 25 to 50 million, although you're probably very lucky if you kind of are working with those super high net worth people. But the decisions around whether somebody's got £500,000 or £1 million, it's so much more powerful. And I guess you get to understand what's driving that person. It's not just about them trying to make a return. It's kind of like all of the goals and aspirations that go along with that, with the money, in terms of making sure that they live, the best version of the lives they want, and looking after the next generation and the next generation and the next.
And out of interest, imagine if you'd done the opposite switch, where you'd come from a very in front of client, advice role, to then, being part of the investment side. I wonder if that would change the way you'd have approached some of those previous decisions. That is interesting.
It's a really clever frame. That I'm not too sure how. I really wouldn't know if that would have served me like well to do it the other way around. Because, like I say, I just got to the point where I was so disillusioned with like the way the kind of whole thing was, and it was, it wasn't kind of Wolf of Wall Street, that kind of portrayal, but it was like dog eat dog. You had to really look after yourself. You had to make money. You needed to be making a P&L of $1 million or $2 a year. So there was kind of high stakes, high stress all the time. And yeah, I was still very young. I was only 18 when I started there, and I left when I was 28, 29. So even from my own emotional maturity, I don't think I kind of really like, I certainly am a completely different person today than I was back when I was 28, 29.
Yeah, but certainly gave you a really good grounding on the macroeconomic, impact that things can have on the investment and pension world then.
Yeah, 100%. It was, you were doing asset swaps, you were dealing in, I was on the fixed income side, but, we'd have meetings with the equity people on the floor below us. So it was kind of understanding like where people go to, like they borrow money, how does that actually work? Where do they borrow versus other people? And then it was just, the whole, particularly around gilts, I was kind of heavily involved with the gilt guys. And so that was absolutely brilliant for me in terms of like understanding the fixed income markets and essentially how kind of global markets work.
Yeah, fantastic. And so when you made that leap into then the financial advisor part of the industry, talk me through how that sort of those early years formed the foundation for where you are now.
I would say so. Again, the Abbey had a really good kind of training program. I was a little bit aghast when I sort of said to my friend, like, kind of what's the starting salary here? It's like 16,000 a year, and I was like, there's no way I could live on £16,000 a year. So it was like I'd gone from say six figures, like decent six figures, to like very very low like teens, and so that was a bit of a culture shock. But it was very easy to actually get to a point where you could, I think I kind of doubled that salary in about 18 months to 2 years. So there was like a progression that could be made. And what I did like was, although you had kind of sales targets, they weren't really like hammering you to do those. I was lucky because the location I was in Canary Wharf. So we had a lot of foot flow in that particular branch. So it was kind of easy to do well because there was just so many people there who were obviously doing, working in investment banks around Canary Wharf. So the clientele that was kind of coming in was decent. I feel like from when I started, although I knew my way around the market side, I definitely didn't really understand kind of what was driving people's behaviors. So I'd say I was pretty green in that regard. And I was almost just thinking solely about like the product that would sort of suit whatever the client was like coming to me about what the problem was. I wasn't really that skilled, I think, in kind of delving a bit deeper. But that's something that I've kind of accumulated over the years. I've been doing this now for 25 years as a financial advisor. I would say that in the last certainly 5 to 6 years is probably where my skill set has really, really kind of compounded and really taken off.
And what changed in the last 5 to 6 years where you've seen that
So
sizable increase?
I basically went to work for a firm called Emery Little, who were over in Hemel Hempstead. And the reason that I wanted to join them was because they were the only firm that I'd actually heard of that were using the George Kinder process as kind of a way of working with clients. And, we've all maybe had these kind of calls from recruiters going, oh, I've got this firm and they're in London, high net worth, pay you 60 to 70,000 a year. And it's like kind of the same old conversation. But this call that I took on this particular Friday was they do it really differently. And I kind of said, well, how? Because I kind of hear this all the time and nobody seems to be doing it any differently. He then told me about to go and look at the George Kinder website. He's got the Kinder Institute and he uses a process called Evoke that he created. And so I basically joined this firm in probably about 2019, just because they did it that way. I was so impressed with the level of like depth that you would go to before you even talked about the finances with somebody. And that for me would just resonated immensely, because it was not, you were no longer going to be having these kind of surface level, like, meetings. It was really, really finding out what drives this person, what matters, what motivates them. Having joined Emery Little and then doing the kinder training, we were the first online people to do that course because of COVID. And I was so upset when COVID sort of happened in March 2020, because that course was supposed to happen in person, and they actually managed to shift it to online. And that's the only reason I joined Emery Little, was to kind of like to become good at this. And I was like, oh my God, this is just a nightmare. But the course itself it's still translated even as a non face-to-face course. So we were on 8 or 9 hours a day for 5 days, just like doing all these role plays and learning the techniques. And it was just fantastic. And yeah, I couldn't just then, once I'd done that, I couldn't wait to kind of impart, my new way of being and learning to other people.
I feel your pain. I started my master's degree in January 2020, and the premise, it was a 2-year course, 2 days every 6 to 8 weeks. You're in person all together at the University of Gloucestershire, and they had this amazing new business school that they'd purpose built for it. Did my first, session in January. Thought, oh, okay, this is cool. This is going to be nice. And then obviously the next session's March, and nope, can't come. And in my 2-year course, I think I attended physically in person 4 days out of what should have been 20, 30 days. And they had to shift it online. And some of the lecturers were better than others in terms of making that very early switch into presenting online. So yeah, I feel your pain there. It was a real shame to not get the full experience, but ultimately I did come away with exactly what I did want. So yeah. And you mentioned there that you had that call and they mentioned about the George Kinder. Were you aware of George Kinder prior to taking that call?
No, I wasn't.
So you must have had some level of curiosity to go, okay, they do things different. And you go, oh yeah, everyone says that. What was it though, that early conversation that led you to explore the website and to actually believe what that person said?
Like I say, the fact that they directed me to the Kinder Institute website, and just kind of looking at the content and the books that, George has written a number of books. And it was just that, it's really hard to describe, but for me, it's almost like, when like maybe when you meet somebody like for the first time, and you're just like, you don't know quite what it is about that person, but you're just like, oh my God, I'm totally kind of in love with them, or there's a real strong connection. I got this kind of really strong connection by reading some of the stuff off that website. And yeah, I feel like probably subconsciously I was kind of looking for something that, like, kind of meant something, like there's a strong meaning to all of this stuff, as opposed to, I need to save for retirement. There, you need a pension plan. Let's sort this. Like, this is the kind of the best pension plan for you. Da, 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 da. And it was like, actually, no, let's think about the pension. We can sort that out. We'll do that at the end. But what is it you want that kind of phase of life to look like? There's kind of like much deeper questions that you could actually ask somebody. And again, I feel like, there's a lot of stuff banded around on the internet right now about purpose and meaning, right? It's kind of like people need all these kind of things. And I think for me, luckily, I kind of stumbled on this, and it's given me my purpose. I've always been much more interested in having big conversations with people than, I went to a party on Saturday and I can't stand them. I literally, I can't do superficial. I'd rather you tell me your life story than sort of talk about, the World Cup and the England game and all this kind of stuff. So I've always kind of had this sort of thing in me where I really want to feel and connect with people on a much deeper level than just superficial. And so, yeah, it was like a meeting of the minds, it felt like, and kind of in a very kind of serendipitous way.
And I imagine joining that firm who are embracing that approach meant you were within a group of like-minded people and you weren't having to go on that journey on a solo basis then. How did that environment help really cement and challenge the way you thought?
Well, again, it's a bit like, people have said this about dimensional fund advisors, like it's kind of a cult, right? In terms of like, if you use dimensional, you're in this kind of weird cult. And the way that they do things, it's kind of like, this whole kind of cult thing about it. It probably felt a little bit like that with the Kinder stuff, but it was when you are with like-minded people, you kind of realize that you're not completely going off on a limb here. Like, when it's very American, if I'm being really honest, in terms of, us Brits, we don't necessarily like going that deep with people. We probably want to keep it a little bit more, let's just talk about the money. Let's just talk about the money. So from that perspective, it felt very uncomfortable initially of like, oh my God, this is like, I don't know if people would even like this. But once you get over yourself, you're like, I need to be able to deliver this to people because it is really, really important. So having that kind of group was really important in terms of, one, you're not a complete loon, and it's confirming that other people are thinking like you. So there's like that kind of safety in numbers thing, but also just the fact that when you're kind of then sharing with your peer group, that how they run their businesses and how they're going to maybe do this, so you're kind of getting lots of different inputs into kind of how people will then take this wonderful training and how they would actually make it work for their particular businesses. Which were all really, really different. Some people were dealing with would only just do this, they would solely just do Kinder and not do the money. Someone like me would do it and manage the money. So it was kind of all these different ways of doing it that were really, really helpful in terms of, I guess, thinking about how you would make this work for you. And what actually came out of my training was you have to go through the process yourself when you're doing it. So it's a bit like, I guess, being a psychologist. You have to have therapy to become a psychologist, right? So you have to go through the processes, which is a clever way of learning it all. And through the process, I came out with the fact that I wanted to start my own business. It took me a while to do that, but it was through the process of Evoke that then made me kind of dream big. It's kind of this whole thing about don't put this ceiling on your thinking. And what came out of my own process was I want to start my own thing, which is what I ended up doing.
Fantastic. And I imagine you also then had assumptions that clients wouldn't want to go to that deeper level, like you were talking about there. Did you have any early testing of this where you went into it thinking, oh, the client's never going to be interested, and then all of a sudden they just completely open up for you?
Yeah, and I feel like part of the skill is kind of knowing, you meet the person where they're at, right? So, I mean, I've had people say to me, like, who have become clients, like, Adrian, I don't want any of this coaching nonsense. I just don't want it. I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. Just manage the money. And yet this person who's actually said that, I reckon I've had probably the biggest, deepest conversations with him out of everybody that I know. So inadvertently, he's kind of getting this coaching, even though he told me absolutely like cast iron, I don't want to be coached, or I don't want any of this fluffy stuff. I just want to talk about the money.
Do you think he just didn't want the label?
Yeah, I think that's kind of I find it impossible to not talk about these things and there be kind of no emotion in it,
Yeah.
So whether you advertise, I would blatantly say to somebody who was coming to me, I had a discovery call a couple of Saturdays ago, and I said, look, the way that I do this is, and so perfect approach is we do Evoke. If that's not for you, so I explain how it is. I explain the process. If this isn't for you, then these are the things that I can do as well. Like I can do it traditionally, but for best value and optimum, I think, return, this is the approach that you should think about using. And I believe in it so much that one of the things that I kind of wanted to do when I was doing this for clients was I wouldn't charge any fees to set up the investments. I would just charge for the Evoke process, because I wanted to show a client that, or kind of infer to a client, I value this so much. This is the thing that I'm going to charge for. I'm not going to charge you for the setting up of the investments, because that is, frankly, it's so easy for me to kind of know what to do for everyone's slightly different, but I'm just like, I know how to do that stuff. That's not where the value is. And frankly, people now are even going onto like Claude or ChatGPT and going, check my investment portfolio that this person set up for me. Is it okay? It's like it's becoming so commoditized, that side of things, that I feel like the emotional stuff and what's driving the person, and like to kind of be part of that, creating, the best version of their life that they can. That's where the value is. And so that's why I charge for that specifically and not for setting up the investments.
Really interesting. And would you say that's where you get the most fulfillment from as well?
100%. Like I say, I mean, after doing something for 25 odd years, it's like I say, it sounds a little bit trite, but it is easy to go, right, I'm going to set up an ISA, a GIA, pension, investment bond. Like, I know the best people to do those things with. I've got all of the investments. I know it all. It's like it's so simple. It's just bread and butter. But the value and the rub and the fulfillment is like, right, why are we actually doing all these things?
And was that something you also unearthed when you went through that process yourself of going through it and you identified you want to set up your own business? Did you also identify where you get the most enjoyment and fulfillment from working with clients then?
Yeah, again, I think like the when I do my kind of reviews, I do it like a review like every kind of 6 months. So I do like an interim review in the summer, and I do like the full fat one at the end, at the start of every year. And the process of like getting all the all the reporting in terms of like performance and all of that is just you kind of just ticking a compliance box. The juice of the conversation, whether the investments have done well or not, it's like you they're not going to be all good conversations. When you have a down year, people are generally quite unhappy, and when things are up, people tend to not even want to really talk about the investments. It's like it's up 50k, so I'm kind of happy. We don't really need to talk about that. The juice of the conversation is like, right, what are we actively thinking about doing in the next 12 months? Let's be deliberate, and let's be purposeful about how you're going to create like 2026 as being a really, like, you can call it a really great year. So it's kind of like just getting people to really focus in on the things that they want to be doing, and occasionally give them a little nudge and just say, look, hey, you said you were going to book that holiday to Japan. Have you done it yet? It's funny as well how people sometimes come to me, particularly pension clients. I've noticed that they kind of come to me and ask me in a very subtle way, can I have some of my own money? So it's really, really weird how, like, it's just, again, it's about people kind of wanting the permission. Like, I'm kind of granting sometimes permission. Yes, you can take 30 grand out of your pension to go and book this thing up that you want to do. It's really interesting, the psychology of how we kind of operate on these levels without even really thinking about it.
Fantastic. And you mentioned earlier about going deeper with clients. We've talked a bit about it here already. And do you see a transformation with clients that, work with you for the first time, of, like you said, that chap who doesn't want the coaching element, but you have those deep conversations? Is there kind of a penny drop moment or a light bulb moment where you see them realize what you're trying to achieve with getting them to unearth their own behaviors and emotions they attach towards money, particularly?
I think you can. So for me, it's kind of about, and I say this to people all the time. I say, look, I've probably said this to you countless of times, or sorry if I'm repeating myself. So I kind of keep my messaging is super consistent, and so there are times where after, say, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, I've recently had this with somebody as well, where they kind of said to me after a review meeting, it's like, Adrian, it's the pennies kind of finally dropped, and like everything you've been saying to us, we kind of understand it now, and we also feel really comfortable. It's like spending X amount on stuff that they would never have done 4 or 5 years ago. So it's that repetition of the messaging, and I guess it's very hard to be confident about something when you're not, right. But if you've heard the same dude says the same thing to you every year, like, for 5 years, at some point you're going to go, like, maybe this is true, right? Hopefully. So, we've got great tools like cash flow models and stuff like that, where you can kind of show the impact of the decisions that people are making, and like, if we did this, how would that affect everything else in terms of the financial plan? So it's really that consistency of message. It's telling people the truth. It really, I mean, for some people, they could run out of money kind of in their mid-80s kind of thing. So sometimes you've got to be the bearer of bad news and saying, look, hey, if we keep this level of spending up, like actually it's going to create some liquidity issues for you in the mid-80s, as opposed to, well, we should take a little bit more risk and then we'll eradicate that problem. It's like, it's a completely different conversation. So I feel like being the bearer of both good and bad news and being consistent about those messages will allow the client, I feel, to actually take action, do things.
Yeah. So that they believe you when you say you can make this decision. They know that they're not just you're trying to appease them.
Yeah, and sometimes, like I say, you've got to be the bearer of like news that maybe isn't going to land particularly favourably. But again, it's about that kind of the honesty of what the message is, like the fact that, look, if we do this, then I feel like this will be a better scenario. And also, you've got to treat people. Yeah, they're not silly, even though they maybe don't understand the dynamics of how like investments work like fully. But if markets go down 25% tomorrow, like I would assume that those people would spend a bit less than they did the year before, because we kind of got that wiring in us about, the survival kind of mechanisms that we've got. So yeah, would you go on 4 holidays that year? Probably not, because even though you feel like you could afford it, you're probably just going to hunker down a little bit. So we're all kind of intelligent enough to look after ourselves, but it is nice to have somebody who's like that kind of person that's walking alongside you, just saying, look, no matter what, we're going to be fine, and if you're not going to be fine, this is what we need to do to make you fine.
And is that where you would say that the emotional intelligence is so important for you in your role to balance that alongside your technical expertise as well?
Yeah, I would. So I would say that I'm a believer, particularly with things like, you've got all the big kind of AI chat. Your emotional intelligence or your EQ is going to be more important than your IQ. So the fact that I can type anything into Claude and it can give me I mean, obviously Google could do this as well, right? But it's gone to a different level. So for you to be able to connect with somebody on an emotional level, and again, even things like Claude can do this. They can do cognitive kind of empathy, where we go, oh, yeah, I broke up with my girlfriend last week. I'm really sorry to hear that. It must be so hard. I mean, it can do all of that, right? So what we want to be doing, I think, as advisors, in order to survive, is that we really, really need to engage on this level and make sure that kind of is the differentiator for me, I think, over all the LMMs. And at some point, I went to a conference in Miami in March where I kind of got on the plane going, well, my job as an advisor is probably safe. AI can't really take my job. I left the conference thinking, oh my God, we are potentially screwed. So at some point, all of these things are going to be able to do things as good as us. That is, I have no doubt about that. So for somebody kind of coming into the profession now, I would be really focusing on those kind of what they would call sign of soft skills. Like technical stuff is important. You should know it because you need to be able to reference off against Claude. Like Claude is not right all the time. ChatGPT is not right all the time. So you kind of need to know your onions, but those kind of like soft skills, taking it a layer, taking it subtly to a different place where somebody says they don't want that kind of thing, but you're doing it without them even realizing. Those are the kind of skills I feel like we would need to adopt if you're starting like from fresh now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if a client was using Claude for argument's sake, asking it questions about its money, I feel like people always sometimes present the best version of themselves, and Claude won't know to challenge that necessarily, or it may get more intelligent to do that. But I think for you, if you're practicing this every day, having these deep conversations, actively listening as well, knowing when to probe, when to shut up and let the client carry on talking, that's then where you can really peel back those layers. And I think it's being assisted with technology. For instance, like you said, cash flow modeling is a tool that's been around for some years now. And, it definitely has transformed the way you plan a solution. I think I remember the conversation I had with Chris Budd on this is that, if you aren't using cash flow modeling in the last few years, you probably will start losing clients to those who are. He's of the opinion those who are doing the well-being side as well, that's the next phase of where people may win or lose clients to other, to peers. because that's the deeper element that clients possibly don't realize they need yet.
Yeah. I would say again, when you're it's, an advisor is in such a privileged position because we get to understand and know pretty much every facet of someone's life. You know, if you're going to if a client's going to the doctor, they're not going to talk about their money. But if I'm sitting in a review or client calls me up and says, "Oh, I've had this blood test and I've got this, I've got a diagnosis of this." It's like we get to see absolutely everything if we're doing our job right. So I would say that if I don't know something about a client, that's on me. That's big because it means that at some level I've kind of failed where they can't feel that they could open up to me and tell me those things. And I feel like you're right about we are very good at presenting the best version of ourselves, like to people, but also to like Claude or something. If we're looking at, please analyze my spending, and you kind of leave out a few kind of key items. It's just you need to have that kind of human element, I think, to kind of challenge your thinking, come up with some different ideas, and yeah, I feel like the human connection there, and the human kind of interface of being that person to challenge is again something that I just don't think that the LMMs have quite got it yet, but maybe that will come as they get more and more advanced.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned earlier attending conferences. You went to the Miami one. The two of us actually met at Advisor 3.0 in May as well in London. So it's a pleasure to catch up with you. How do you feel and what the role of in-person events play in your career growth would be
I
interesting.
think, I mean, again, the fact that I met you at Advisor 3.0 means that because of that real connection of being in person, I'm now sitting and doing a podcast with you. I'm not saying that wouldn't necessarily happen if we'd met offline, but I don't know. I feel like, and again, since COVID, where everybody kind of really got focused on like smelling flowers and looking at the sky, and we've kind of gone back to the way we were pre-COVID. So I feel like the in-person stuff is so important. The Yeah, sometimes it's convenient to do stuff that's kind of online for CPD and what have you, but it's those little 15-minute conversations you'd have like when you're getting a coffee, or maybe you go and have a beer after the conference or something like that, where you get real proper insight. Sometimes it's not even the speakers where you come away with the best ideas, it's actually from your peer group, and people kind of like, it's a very small industry. So like when you're saying about I haven't met Chris Budd, but I know who he is. So, and he's been doing loads of really, really good stuff around that kind of the financial well-being and healthy stuff. But going to see events with these people and understanding kind of what their take is on things, and having that kind of 5 or 10 minute chat and pulling somebody aside. I mean, I met Morgan Housel at the Advisor 3.0 thing. It's like, God, my hero kind of thing for financial books. You just don't get that. You don't get that kind of impact of when it's not face to face.
Yeah, definitely. I do love his book, Psychology of Money.
Just no point in writing it. I'm trying to write a finance book, but I know that I'm already not going to fail because that's just the best book that's ever been written about money.
Yeah, certainly has. And for you as well, is it that it helps challenge your thinking then, attending these events, and it is worth your day out going to them?
Again, 100%. I will always pay and make the effort to go to things in person that are, that there is something there to kind of like make me think a little bit differently, or for me to kind of challenge myself, or just to learn something completely new. I think we've all probably been around long enough where some of these things, these conferences that you go to for free, they're kind of product kind of things. They're paid for by a provider. You come away with a load of books and loads of pens, but you never really kind of learn anything. The ones like Abraham's one, I think it's the best conference in the UK, for example, Advisor 3.0. You've got Andy Hart's been doing some great stuff with humans under management. Those are the kind of environments where I feel like, again, going back to what you said about the kinder kind of loving, where you're meeting people, like-minded people. People who go to those things are kind of like they're in your kind of sphere as well, right? So, I mean, humans under management. If you're going to that conference, you're gonna basically meet a load of people who think it's kind of human first, money second. So it's really important, really important.
Is that where it's really important, where you did that exercise of unearthing your own attitudes, that now you know what rooms you want to step into versus the ones you don't then?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I would say that it's kind of like, yeah, you're finding your tribe, right? So you go, right, okay, this is kind of like this is where I kind of feel like I belong. Good. I'm not the only person who's also thinking this way. And yeah, I feel like, again, I feel like advisors are actually quite a helpful bunch. It's not like we're all kind of going, I've got this really big secret about how to run a successful business. Like everybody's really, really happy to kind of share best practices, things not to do. And again, it's really encouraging for people who are kind of just starting out, where there's so much help, so much advice about how to kind of, like, these are the mistakes I've made, don't do it this way, or think about it this way. So it just feels like we're kind of just a good bunch of eggs in the financial services industry, as opposed to, like, I'm not going to tell anybody how to do anything because I don't want them to be more successful than me.
Yeah, fantastic. And you've recently also started your own podcast as well. Tell us about the sort of journey that's sort of, what learns have you gone from doing that, would be interesting.
Well, I would say, again, being kind of self-reflective, being kind of acknowledging my own kind of weaknesses, which I think, again, some of the stuff that I learned from doing the Kinder thing was you kind of shining a light on yourself. And so it took me 3 years to basically launch this podcast because I just kept on getting in my own way. So I bought equipment 3 years ago that's kind of, now it was out of date because there's like much better microphones and stuff, like my new microphone's behind me there. So I was just getting in my own way doing this thing because ultimately, without me even admitting it, like out loud, I was probably scared of failing. So the fear of nobody listening to it is probably was my biggest fear, but I never verbalized that. And so I was doing end of year review on myself. And so it was kind of like between that kind of Christmas, New Year week at the end of 2025, where I was like, this podcast thing, it's always been it's been on my list for the last 3 years. Like, so I just said, look, is this thing really still important for me to do? Or if it's not, then just sack it off, because you're writing the same things on a list and it's just not happening. So I was like, no, it is important. So I basically just went on this really quick course, which sort of, it was like 2 weeks from like to do it, to launch it. And I was like, right, I'm doing that course. I'm going to launch it. If it's crap, it's crap, but I'm going to do it. I'm just going to get out of my own way. So we're 6 episodes in now. I love whittling away my kind of what goes on in my head to a camera and a microphone for 30, 40 minutes on a Saturday. My little musings of what I think about money and the world and life. So I've kind of got into a really nice momentum with it. I actually look forward to doing it. So yeah, long may that continue.
Fantastic. Well, good on you for doing it. I also, know where you've been. I have on my phone a thumbnail I created of this podcast, or the podcast I had in mind, from 2019, and it took me till 2024 to launch it. And I was very much like you. I had the fear of failure. I had the fear of, getting around to it. I'm too busy. And sometimes you've just got to bite a bullet. And I love having these conversations with people like yourself and learning about their journeys. And I always have. I just never got around to doing it. So there is real merit and fulfillment in doing something and scratching that itch as well, I would say. And good on you for actually taking that leap.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of those this is kind of with the client work. There's always kind of an unspoken kind of fear about, like, what we're kind of doing or we're not doing, and just being able to be completely and utterly vulnerable with your own self is quite powerful. My show is called Emotionally Invested because, again, it kind of leads into my thesis about, like, just life, is that we're everything that we do and what we decide to do or don't do is based on an emotional feeling. So everything's driven by emotion. And so for me, like, to kind of put that Emotionally Invested podcast into the world is hopefully just shining a light on, like, how we do get in our own way and what what is driving those operating systems and what we can do maybe to kind of change that, and kind of learning of the basics about things like retirement and investing and budgeting and all these other things that I've been talking about.
Fantastic. Well, good on you for doing it, and long may it continue as well for you.
And you, Ryan. Again, I feel like a kindred spirit in the fact that I'm not the only person. It takes like 4 or 5 years to launch a podcast.
Yeah, it definitely takes a bit of time, particularly with public um, work as well, because the fear of other people's thoughts is just amplified, isn't it? If there's something you're doing very silently, then it is in your own head, but it does get amplified when you're doing it publicly. But yeah, and we've had some fantastic stories of people who have really benefited from the podcast, who really enjoy the podcast, and that does mean so much. But unless someone's a really piece of work, they're not going to go out of their way to say they hated it. And that's more on them if they then take action in themselves to say how much they dislike something. But you do get fulfillment from hearing those stories where someone really did mean it. And also I'm getting fulfillment for myself in enjoying the process, getting to hear these stories and sit down with people like yourself, and also for our guests as well. It's nice to take a moment to reflect and see that journey, which life goes on so quickly and so busy sometimes you don't think from where you've come from to where you are, for instance yourself, that very corporate background, having to look at those transfers you were making and right through to then now you're very much looking at the emotional side that someone has. That's a very, end-to-end spectrum you've transitioned through, but you've enjoyed the whole journey along the way by the sounds of it, which is just, amazing as well.
Yeah, I've loved it, and by no means am I the finished article as well. So I always feel like there's room to grow and develop even more. I totally love what I do. So do I ever see myself retiring? Probably not. I will try to do this for as long as I possibly can. So I've said to clients, you're kind of stuck with me until something probably happens to me, which they seem to be quite okay about. So no, I feel like just that kind of like wanting to be a better advisor this year than I was last year. That's kind of always been like my thing about just generally. I'm always looking just to make myself that kind of 1% better each year. It drives me, it gets me out of bed on a Monday, and yeah, I'm just kind of an avid reader and learner, and I think it's a great quality to have if you're a financial advisor, to want to develop and learn more and not think, just remain humble. Like I have not got all the answers, and I'm not the finished product yet.
Fantastic. Well, that sums it up beautifully for us. And yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's really reinforced some of the beliefs I have about that people first approach. So important. Also, the impact you can have of being in the right room of people as well, and the legacy that leaves in you. And then also, we did touch on as well the importance of having right people, right processes, and right technology as well. Those are a lot of things that I'm really passionate about. So, thank you very much for joining us, Adrian, and thank you to those listening as well.
Thanks very much, Ryan. Really appreciate your time.
No problem at all. And if you are listening and enjoyed this conversation, please do stay tuned for other conversations like today, where we look to deliver valuable insights like we have.